Hi, I'm Rahul Chandwani, and let's get started with this chapter. So, let's talk about the initial planning phase of your project. This is the part where you'll think about gathering references, where to find the necessary resources, and the important things to keep in mind before you start working on any project. So, while this class focuses on modeling and designing your own assets from scratch, it's important to understand how and when you can use external resources to help you work more efficiently, especially in a professional setting. One of those resources being pre-made assets or kit bash models. To put it simply, kit bashing is using pre-made 3D assets to quickly populate your scenes, enhance an existing design, or just explore new ideas. Sites like kitbash.com and Big Medium Small are great places to look for really well-made, handcrafted models like destroyed buildings, cityscapes, factories. But a lot of the time, especially for professional work, I'll need stuff like home or office interiors, generic sci-fi pieces, characters, or vehicles. And places like ArtStation Marketplace and CG Trader are great places to find almost any kind of models you're looking for. So let's talk about some of the practical uses of pre-made assets in your work. I think for beginners, this can be a great way to practice composition and lighting in 3D and really familiarize yourself with your 3D tools without having to go too deep into modeling and designing your own assets. Sometimes I'll start by bashing some pieces around to explore different shape ideas and compositions when I'm not really sure what I'm going for. It's a great way to get rid of the complete blank canvas when I'm starting out and get some of the creative juices flowing. I'll often later go and replace kit bash pieces with my own custom designs once I'm more sure of what I'm going for. Most importantly, kit bashing is especially useful for client work where you might need a lot of generic set dressing. Like if you're working on something where the objects in the scene don't have a major role in the story or are just sort of part of the environment. Pre-made assets can help populate your scene quickly and save a lot of time as well. Of course, in a lot of cases, you can definitely use kit bash models to create really unique designs or environments as well. It really depends on the task at hand. However, it's important to not be dependent on these assets. The challenge is that sometimes you can be limited to how much you can alter these pieces, especially if you need to create something truly unique. It's good to know that you can always create anything you want by yourself. In fact, it can be quite freeing. And often this comes down to your knowledge of the world and your design skills. As most modeling tools we will use in this course are quite simple, it mostly comes down to knowing what to create rather than how, especially when it comes to your personal work. Creating your own assets means you have full creative control over them, from the overall design to the smallest details. With enough practice, you're essentially building your own visual style over time. For a portfolio, this can really help set your work apart from the crowd. And this is crucial if you're working on or want to work on really specific games or projects, or just want to create a really unique look for your own IP. Over time, you'll even start building your own library of assets, which can be incredibly valuable. Building your own library of personal assets allows you to pull from your own designs rather than always searching through external resources, which is great when you want to build your own IP. Taking the time to even model mundane objects over and over again forces you to observe your references and the world around you more closely. When you make these yourself, you start noticing small, often overlooked details of the world. It's similar to studying. Just like you would paint to understand more about color and value, you can study the world around you in more detail and learn about how it works by modeling. This gives you the opportunity to really analyze each part of your reference and even think about functionality. As a beginner, I often found myself only being able to think in large shapes and general forms, but when it came down to the details, I wouldn't know what to do. Observing your references and studying them through modeling forces you to really analyze the world deeply and how everything works. As an artist for games, this is really valuable as you're often asked to design worlds that are incredibly detailed and have a lot of thought behind them. The repetition will over time help you master your techniques as well. In practice, the ideal approach is often a hybrid of both methods, mostly depending on the task you're working on and the amount of time you have to complete it. It's really rare that I'll make an entire artwork just out of kitbash models. Personally, I tend to use them for tertiary elements, those smaller objects in a scene that don't require unique designs, like vehicles, streetlights, etc. Ultimately, while kitbashing can be a time-saving and practical tool, designing your own models from scratch provides creative control, originality, and the potential for higher quality work. Both methods have their place, and knowing when to use each one is key for 3D concept art. So let's talk about one of the most crucial parts of the process before you start any artwork, which is gathering and using references. Whether you're working on a professional or personal project, understanding how to find, categorize, and use references effectively is an essential part of the process. So let's break down why research and references matter and the importance of building a solid visual library for your work. The first key point is to know what you're looking for. As a concept artist, especially if you're working in games, you're not always designing for aesthetics, you're designing with purpose as well. No matter what you're creating, everything you design needs to feel like it has function, a reason to exist. When looking for references, analyze them deeply and ask yourself questions about why something looks that way or how is it supposed to function. Take an interest in as many things as possible about the world. In games, especially if you're aiming for a more realistic style, players need to believe that the worlds you create are real and functional. When you understand how things work, it becomes much easier to design with purpose. As a concept artist, knowing as much as you can about the world is just as important, if not more so, than what tools you use. So take this just as seriously and don't overlook this part of the process. As you start to look at more and more references and learn more about the world, you'll start to build a visual library in your head. The more references you accumulate in your mind, the more quickly you can pull ideas and designs together when you're working on an artwork. Look at what inspires you beyond just concept art and what other artists create in the industry. Follow other creators on social media platforms. Follow vlogs that talk about history or architecture, or photographers that travel the world capturing everything they see through their lens. Look at graphic designers, car photographers, or even filmmakers and see how they create. You can always learn from all kinds of disciplines and bring something back into your work. All this should feed into your creative process, giving you broader, a more vast range of knowledge and ideas to work with. This way, when you face a design challenge, you aren't stuck with a small, shallow pool of references. I think when it comes to personal work, you shouldn't put a limit to how long you should spend researching. You for sure don't want to fall into an endless rabbit hole of reference gathering, but you also definitely shouldn't feel like you need to rush the process either. You're not on a tight deadline, so use your free time to explore and build your visual library. This will only help you in the long run, especially in professional work, as there you will definitely have a budget on time. When I start a project, I'll usually create a reference board with references relevant to the artwork that I'm working on. When working, it's important to keep checking with your references, and creating a board is a great way to organize your references and keep coming back to them. When creating a reference board, it's important to categorize your references that suit your needs and not just dump all of your references randomly. You can organize your references, and how you organize your references plays a huge part in being able to come back to them easily and look for what you want. You can also categorize your references for different areas of your work. For example, you can break them down into main references, references for lighting, textures, general shapes, and details. I will usually have one or a few master references that capture the gist of what I want in my artwork. I'll then support these with detailed references for other props or designs, and then some for lighting or mood of my scene. This way I can have a hierarchy of images, from the main ones that inspire me to other complementary references to give me more information about what I want to create. When looking for photos or references, it's important to know the difference between natural, unedited photos versus more edited, color graded images. Edited images taken by professional photographers or stills from movies or shows can be a great reference for post processing or color grading and how slight compositing can enhance your own artworks. but they often aren't a great reference for how natural light behaves in the real world. In photography or film, they usually tend to crunch the darks and heavily color grade their content, which isn't always a correct representation of the real world. It's important to know that the difference, and when looking for references for natural light, try to avoid these kind of images. On the other hand, natural, unedited images are perfect for studying how light and shadows behave, how materials react to light and bounce light around. Although it's important to note that most cameras will never truly be able to capture what the real world looks like. The best source of reference is your own eyes. It's good to have the habit of observing your surroundings whenever you go out. Look at the colors of the sky during different times of the day, how light reacts to different objects and materials. Observe textures and details wherever you go. So the next time you have to make an artwork, let's say in a sunset lighting, you'll know what a good reference is and you'll know what to look for because you would have observed how sunsets actually look like in real life. I've found that platforms like Flickr, for some reason, have a great library of natural, unedited photos, whereas sites like Unsplash or Tumblr often have edited, more professional photography or film like photos. Both are great and necessary depending on what you're looking for. When I'm not sure of what I want to create, I'll usually just look at Pinterest or Tumblr. I love Pinterest since its algorithm remembers what you like and what you click on and always gives you more of what you're interested in. It's also a great place to make boards of all the different kinds of things you're interested in and create a library of references you can come back to. You can also follow other users if you like their collection of gathered images. Although sometimes I feel like Pinterest can become an echo chamber of ideas, as it always only shows you more of what you've previously liked. So I'd make sure to consciously remind yourself to always look for inspiration in other different sources as well. It's also usually during this part of the process that I would collect my textures that I'll be using for 3D. For most of my work and in this class, I'll be getting most of my textures from textures.com. I usually only look for textures from their photo textures section. They have a massive library of photo textures, and it's an amazing tool to be able to mix and combine real photos as materials in your 3D workflow. I think it gives your work that realistic quality that I like, and also is so much more intuitive than mixing shaders in 3D. We'll definitely learn more about gathering textures and creating your own unique textures later on in the class. A lot of problem solving happens before you get started on a task, during the research phase. This is where you begin to lay the foundation of any piece you're working on. Understanding how to effectively approach your project is crucial, and this will save you from having to make major course corrections later on in the project. When you're designing for a game or just creating a personal project, start by clearly identifying your project's goals, the aesthetic direction, and all the potential challenges that you might face during your creation process. Ask yourself questions like, what kind of design task are you facing? Where will you need to use kit bash models to speed things up, or will you be modeling everything from scratch? It's important to gather all your resources early on as much as you can, so you're not breaking the flow of your creative process once you started working. Most of the time, when you're working on client projects, you'll be having a budget on time, so you'll want to prioritize tasks based on how much time you have. It can be easy to get bogged down by details early on, so you need to make sure you're not spending more time than you have. Break down your tasks into manageable stages, like blocking out the basic shapes and layout of your scene, then moving on to modeling in detail and texturing. Blocking out most of your scene early on also helps you foresee any challenges you might face later. Try to look for any hurdles you might face and problem solve during the research and blockout phase. This way, you won't be scrambling to figure things out when you've already spent a lot of time and can't afford to start over. A strong start can make all the difference in how smoothly the rest of the process goes. When you're practicing, this is definitely something you learn to do over time. So when you're learning, don't be afraid to fail and start over. This is how you learn the roadblocks you usually face and solve them over time as you practice. You always learn through trial and error. Concept art is a fluid process. There's no one way to approach every task. so you will often have to adapt your workflow depending on the project's needs. While there are definitely streamlined ways to work, some that we learn in this class, the key is finding a combination of techniques that work best for you. Ideally, your workflow is a mixture of what you've learned from other people and what you've learned about yourself and how you work through practice. Over time, you'll develop your own style and approach to the kind of work that you want to do. The key is to be open to experiment and challenge yourself whenever you find yourself getting too comfortable. For this class, we'll be creating a more finished, realistic style and take an approach I tend to use both for personal and professional work. When creating concepts that's intended for a project like a game, I personally like creating work that closely resembles the final result as much as possible. This doesn't mean that it has to be a fully detailed or polished piece each time, but the core design choices, materials, and textures should all be clearly visible. The idea is to guide the art team as clearly as possible so they can replicate your vision without any room for interpretation. Our concepts often serve as the foundation of what becomes the physical assets in a game. The decisions we make are reflected directly in the game's environment. So when you're working on this course, make sure you're very intentional with the decisions you make. The shapes, textures, and design choices you make matter. So take your time and let your design choices speak clearly and always push for the best possible result. That's it for this chapter. I'll see you in the next one.